Detroit is Different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is Different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.
Let's do it. All right. What up, though? This is Sterling Toles with another episode of Detroit is Different, and I am here with one of my very, very, very dear friends and one of my most favorite artists, creatives in the city of Detroit, Kesswa. What is up?
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So what's going on? How you doing today?
I'm good. I just got off work.
You got off work?
I did, yep.
Yeah. How was the day at work?
It was really good.
It was
Really
good.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, the hair stuff?
Actually, it's just a number of things. I was running around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have been thinking about interviewing Kes for this podcast for a very long time because she is one of those people that I really, I just hear and I feel like she just has the thing. I always tell her she has the it. Like, it's inexplainable. Some people just have that thing that there's a light that just emerges from them without trying or without much thought. And a lot of times they don't realize it, which I don't think you realize it all the time. But you do, and I'm so glad you have it. And I wanted to bring her here also because she just put out an EP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Called Soften, is it?
Yep.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about the EP?
Yeah, so Soften is a collection of songs that I wrote in 2017. I was working with a producer, Benjamin Hill, who goes by Askans, and at the time I was like really, really feeling inspired to make something, just to make something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never identified as an artist before. I always knew that I was a creative person and that I loved art.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I didn't think I was a singer really at the time,
Mm-hmm.
or a songwriter, but I really wanted to like kind of create something like a tangible like representation of what I felt like my inner world was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really, really like interested in these Afrofuturist concepts and like just studying like sound and music and like Black people's relationship to sound and music historically and spiritually. And so that inspired me to kind of write the songs in the way that I did. Also was like kind of coming out of a Buddhist practice, and so I was used to kind of like thinking about like words and the spoken word in the form of like mantra and repetition. So I like wrote the songs in the form of mantra and repetition because I was at such a vulnerable position as like an emerging artist, coming from a place where like I wasn't making any art at all. Nobody knew that I was interested in singing. Nobody knew that I was interested in making music. And then like making this music that felt really deeply personal and like really unique to my own experience and upbringing and like personal tastes. So I was writing to like kind of affirm myself through that process. And then, yeah, just kind of.
Yeah. So what was the moment where you were like, okay, I need to do this? Do you remember that?
I do remember
What
that.
was that
I probably
moment?
called you.
Did you?
I probably did. I just got fired from my job. There was a period of time where I was just like me and jobs just weren't working out. And it was always some kind of like weird, you know, justification, like, oh, we had to let somebody go, or, you know, your schedule doesn't work out. And like, I was used to kind of having 2-3 jobs at a time. So for me, I felt like really, it just kind of like, I felt like the ground was like being pulled out from underneath me, and I needed to like just put my energy and focus into something that I felt like really inspired by, because this like traditional idea of what fulfillment could look like was like rooted in material things and like this American dream kind of idea. I have immigrant parents, so you know, a lot of that comes from just like my upbringing, but as a first generation like Nigerian American person, you know, in Detroit, Michigan, like in 2020, you kind of have to define things for yourself and come into yourself. And like for me personally, I felt the need to be attuned to like what my own personal and individual needs were, and that's kind of where the music came in, because I love music so much. I love discovering new music. I love listening to music across different genres, and like kind of just sharing that experience with other people. And so I just kind of brought all of my like musical like tastes and everything together.
So what are some of those things?
Well, so definitely grew up listening to a lot of hip hop, a lot of traditional Nigerian like gospel music, soul music, R&B, and electronic music.
So who are some of those artists though that really, I know, because I feel like a lot of people, they typically have like an artist or two that, especially when they get started, they may kind of even like model what they do a little bit after, or just kind of pull inspiration from, or you know, like use them as a reference point even sometimes, and that could be like a collection of a few different artists that they do that with and kind of come up with their own thing, you know. So who are some of those artists you really look to and maybe like really that really kind of informed, okay, I want to move in this direction?
You know, it's so interesting because when I was making the project, I did not have any idea what I was doing. I had no idea what it was going to sound like. I was really being led by a feeling. Like I was super, super involved. I would say that I was a co-producer because, you know, down to like the sound of the kick, down to, you know, the chords and the road sample, or like, you know, just the textures and sound effects that were like being arranged in each track. I was like super, super intentional about that because it was going to create the soundscape that would allow for my voice to enter. And my voice could only really enter the track if I felt moved by it at the time. And I'm kind of moving away from that now because I want to make music that's less like vulnerable, I guess. Like I want to make something that I can share, something that feels like more of like, this is for us, instead of like, this is my little secret thing that I didn't think y'all was gonna hear. And so but at the time, you know, it was like, this is my inner landscape that I'm trying to bring out. So I was like really, really like in the moment with it, and I wasn't thinking about any other artists. But I will say that there are like a number of artists who introduced me to different genres of music. Like my introduction to electronic music was Underground Resistance and DJ Assault. And then like when it comes to hip hop, my introduction was Flipmo Squad and like, you know, Wu-Tang and even Lauryn Hill. Like I had, you know, this very 90s hip hop upbringing. R&B was definitely, you know, girl groups like Destiny's Child, TLC, Janet Jackson. Soul was like Anita Baker and Al Green, and my mom listened to a lot of Johnny Cash and like Dolly Parton. So I just had all these kind of different influences. And then like on the Nigerian side of things, Fela, Okpa, like there were like a lot of just like super, super like raw, like African gospel tracks where you don't even really like, when you hear it, you don't assume that it's like they're singing about Jesus because there's just so many drums and like, you know, people singing and like, it was just, I Oh, it was very interesting. But so I have this like weird process. Now I'm kind of looking to different artists to kind of inform me about like song structure and I didn't really have that like kind of introduction to making music where it was like I understand what a hook is, I understand all these things. I just was going off pure feeling. Now that I had that experience of making something that comes like purely from inside and like just like emotion, I'm able to kind of look back and be like, okay, that was really cool. I want to like be more intentional through the process. I want to like especially now that I'm intending to like produce myself moving forward and like be more selective of who I invite into the process. So in order to do that, I have to be able to like tell people what I want to do.
Yeah, so who are some of those people that kind of inform you or instruct you, but like kind of just expose you to like various ways of doing things? Who are those people that you kind of
I've actually been listening to a lot of jazz lately. I've been listening to a lot of Donald Byrd, Bobby Humphries. I've been listening to soul, so I've definitely, returned to like Al Green, Angie Stone, just like really trying to understand how to like communicate a feeling through music, because I feel like that's really important. And I feel like we are kind of in a time where like music is being like produced for mass consumption, and like the goal is to make a lot of stuff and like just always be producing things. And sometimes I feel like the artistry and the creativity kind of suffers, and that's what I enjoy most about music, is like being able to like enter into an artist's world and like have that experience and just feel like the artist believes in what they're sharing.
Yeah, so you were saying like this time you feel like you're going to be creating music where it's like an us kind of thing. Do you have any ideas of like what that would sound like, or how that might contrast to what sonically to what you did previously?
Yeah, so I have definitely been thinking about just having more or clearly communicating those influences that I mentioned before in my music. So like having like there be a clear hip hop influence in the way that I produce the tracks, and maybe even like sampling, because we used a lot of samples on Soft End of like just different drums and things and like instruments, but the way that it was arranged was like in a more experimental way.
Right.
And so I've been just kind of thinking about like what kind of song structures like resonate with me, and thinking about like what I have to say, what it is that I want to communicate, and like what I want to share, thinking about music making from a performance standpoint, because when I was making Soften, I wasn't really thinking about performing it at all.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about like singing it. I really just wanted to make something. And now that I've been performing it for 2 years, I kind of have this understanding of like who I am on a stage, and like how I want to connect with an audience, and like if I was going to see a performance, like what kind of experience would I like to have, and like even just thinking about like what kind of music like makes me move, what kind of music makes my body move without even having to think about it.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, so what has your evolution been like live, like on stage for you? Like where did you start and where do you feel like you are now?
Yeah. So when I started performing, I was like extremely nervous. I was so like reserved. I'm very critical of myself on stage because I hold performers to such a high esteem. I think it's just, in my head, it's something that like, you have to be a certain kind of person to get on stage in front of like, even just 50 people and like share, Now that I've seen that people are generally like kind of gracious with performers and like encouraging of people who get on the stage, it makes me think, it made me start to think about like how I could like incorporate more of myself, like without holding back as much. And so I went from performing with a scans who would like do some triggering of like the songs and play bass to doing like vocal to track performances for a year. So I pretty much just, you know, have the instrumental and just be singing on stage, which was a rough time. It was a rough time.
How's it a rough time?
Because for me personally, I love being able to kind of like bounce off of another person energetically and be in the moment. One thing that I love about like live instrumentation is that like I can lead. And so like if I want to drag out a phrase, if I'm feeling like, you know, I'm really feeling this lyric and I want to like do some type of embellishment, I can go ahead and do that, and like it will, whoever I'm performing with will have that understanding and they'll follow me, and then it can be like an experience that's harmonious. But when you're performing to a track, it's very, very rigid and very structured. And so you might not have that space to like, you know, do the things that you want to do if you didn't create that space in the track, which I didn't, you know, starting out. But now I've been performing with my good friend Nosier. He's from Chicago, and he's a drummer and electronic music producer, and he triggers samples on the stage, and like we just kind of like, I don't know, we vibe. We have a similar creative vision, and he's really, really passionate about making music from a place of like just healing and like being intentional.
So let's go back a little bit. So when you were a kid of immigrant parents in school, where did you go to school again?
So when I was living on the east side, I was at Dove Academy, and then
where is that?
It was on the east side.
You don't remember?
They moved.
Okay.
You know, charter schools.
Yeah.
But then we moved to Southfield, and I went to Bernie Middle School. And graduated from Southfield Lathrop High School.
So what were those music outlets for you? Was it watching videos? How were you exposed to music as a kid, especially and not like the traditional stuff that was in the household, but how were you exposed to the flip modes and like the, you know, the things that your parents weren't necessarily going to give to you?
Well, flip mode, like my brother introduced me to hip hop at a very young age, because he was the one that was responsible for taking me and my younger sister to school. And so, you know, he was super into like listening to his music really loud, probably too loud, and like, you know, driving with the seat all the way back, like just, you know, drag race.
And how much older was he?
I want to say he's like 13 years older than me. And so he was my introduction to it, and he just listened to a lot of like super like East Coast hip hop.
This is what, like the late 90s?
Late 90s, yeah. Even early 2000s. And he was my introduction to Outkast, who like plays a huge role in just like my creative vision or my artistic vision. And then when I moved to Southfield, I just started to like kind of just refine my taste in my own way, like be introduced to artists that I felt like were more contemporary. And
where were they at? Were they at on BT or videos? Was it the radio?
Everywhere, like YouTube, VH1, BT. I watched a lot of VH1 Soul.
I remember,
and I had my like pop, you know, like rock kind of stage. I wouldn't call it a stage actually, because those people could really sing.
Who are some of those people?
Haley Williams from Paramore. I remember listening to a lot of her. Evanescence, you know, just like vocalists from like different cultures. But at the time I didn't really think that, you know, I was listening from that place, but that's what attracted me, was like just their skill, like their skill level. And so when I was in high school, I was listening to like, I was really, really into Lupe Fiasco.
Where are you?
I was like, oh my God. And to this day, I love when like a rapper is telling a story, can like,
right.
you know, really paint a picture. And he does such an amazing job at doing that.
Yeah. So those years, did you feel like any inclination that you would be doing music at some point, or did you just feel like I just love this? And
my parents wanted me to be a pharmacist. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Wayne State. I'm going to be a pharmacist. And when I got to college, so Southfield Lathrop is like kind of like a performing arts. It is a performing arts high school, but I didn't really participate in a lot of the like arts activities, or I didn't really utilize all of the resources.
Right.
And so outside of just, you know, random electives and things like that. And when I got to college, you know, all of my friends, they were doing that. They were like, you know, dancing and singing and like stuff. And I felt like they had hobbies that they carried with them into like, you know, the university, and they were still like kind of just, they just had things to do, and I didn't have things to do. And I was like, wow. I like spent a little bit of time reflecting, thinking about like, what do I actually like? Like what, you know, what would I want to do? Where can I begin to like, you know, develop hobbies? And the only thing that I kind of took away from that reflection was that I really enjoy listening to music. And so in my head, I was like, well, maybe I could DJ. Maybe I could like, you know, just like take this massive music collection that I have and like curate it and share it with people. People seem to enjoy like when I play music, or like, you know, listening to things that I may have found. And from there, I like attempted to like, you know, produce very, very early. And it was such a learning curve that I ended up somehow and like attempting to sing. And then
so did you feel like did you ever like sing along to stuff when you were younger and think I don't sound that bad, or like did you know you could sing, or was it just like I'm just gonna try this? Like did you have a feeling that this was something that you could do, or where were you at?
That was the first thing I ever wanted to be. Like when someone asks you, you know, when you're younger, what do you want to be when you grow up? Initially, I didn't have a response. Like I was like, I don't know. It's like such a, you know, big question. I'm 7. Like I don't, I don't even know what's out there, what's possible. And I remember watching TV, and I, like in the 90s, there were just so many like beautiful Black women singing together, and it just looked like they were enjoying themselves. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. And so, you know, I have 3 sisters, and I had like a lot of cousins. So I would try and sing with my sister and my cousin, and like I had no idea what I was doing. I just enjoyed it. And I remember, I think in my like preteen years, considering it seriously, but I didn't really think that there was a possibility. Nothing. There was no nurturing around that for me in my environment. I also didn't really see a lot of women that looked like me, you know, kind of making music, or, you know, being really successful in the music industry. And so I just kind of let it go. And I didn't really think that much about it until it just fell into my lap, kind of. During my reflection, like thinking about like, well, what can I do with music? It was and it just felt like so like irrational. Like, why would I sing? Like, I can't sing.
Yeah, how did it fall into your lap?
So I remember making this one track that actually played at the Sound House at one time that I was there. And it was my interpretation of like a techno track.
I remember it.
Yeah. And you know, there was no song, there was no structure. It wasn't like every 8 bars something's like being introduced. It was just very like free form. And at the time, like my understanding of like production and arrangement was like really limited, but I knew that something was missing. And so I was like, maybe it's vocals. And I reached out to some friends, and I couldn't find anybody to sing on it. And I was like, maybe I'll try it and like, like sample my voice or do something. And then someone connected me to a vocal coach who like asked me like very, very quickly to just sing back up for her. Because at the time she was teaching vocal performance stuff, but she wasn't performing as an artist, and so she was going to be like re-emerging as an artist, and she kind of needed that support on stage.
Right.
And then I don't know, like it just felt like there was so much work for me to do around my voice and like my relationship to my voice. So I took it very seriously. I still take it very seriously. Like I want to be the best singer that I can be, and like the way that I define that has changed so much over time, because before it was about having a voice that was perfect, or like, having a voice, being able to do all these things. And now it's more so like being really earnest and like being able to be a passionate singer.
Right.
I took like years to kind of even, reframe. I think when I was growing up, an obstacle or like just something that blocked me from attempting to sing was that I have like, I don't have a pop music voice. My voice is like kind of thick, and I've been told that I have a darker tone and a warm tone. Yeah, really? That's what people say.
Okay.
I'm cool with that. Because a lot of my favorite vocalists, like Anthony Hamilton is one of my favorite vocalists. Anita Baker, Layla Hathaway, like they have these really rich tones and warm tones. And so, at the time, like I was thinking like, oh, the best vocalists like, can sing really high and do all these fluttery things. And, I can't do that. I can never do that. People who can do that just know how to do that from birth. So there were like a lot of things that kind of got in the way, but it was something that I always wanted to do secretly. And so I would even go as far as like recording my voice in my phone, like singing in the shower quietly. And people just started kind of picking up on it. Like people, my roommate in college, my best friend from high school, and everybody was so supportive and encouraging. And like, why don't you just sing? Why don't you just, try?
Yeah. So let's go back to when I met you. And it was at Pyramid Sound. You remember? And I was with a friend of mine. And it's funny because I had seen you a few times, like at stuff there or just around. At that point I had no idea that you even sang, but there's always people on the scene that like ever so often you'll get a person that you can tell is a little bit more hyper curious than a lot of other people on the scene. It's like they want to know everything. They want to, like they, you could just tell that some people are just there to be seen and to schmooze or to like be social. And then you could tell other people are there to like really learn and like really grow and really kind of connect to things that help them along their journey, like they're mining for sustenance in the community, you know what I'm saying? And you felt like one of those people. Around that time, like where was your relationship, you feel, to the scene, or like or also like what was your entrance into the scene,
I was a student at Wayne State, and I just have a love for art and music. I would just go with friends, hang out with friends, and I'm always like, I'm the kind of person who can go to a place by themselves if I'm enjoying what's happening. And so I remember, I think I was at Detroit Vegan Soul or something, and I saw Pyramida. I drove past it, and I think I just loved like the feeling of West Village. And so it was like, let me just see, what's over there. And I walked in there. I think Andre was the first person I met from Pyramida, and like I was just like, what is this place? Like, what do they do? I see that they have records. Like,
Right.
you know, it's just this very like cute house in this like neighborhood where there isn't really a lot of development happening just yet at that time.
Right.
And you know, I love music and I love discovering music, so I would just come back. And then he eventually told me about like the first Friday of every month, the beat profile. And I was
Right.
like, what? Like, I want to come. Like, I want to see what that's, you know,
Yeah.
about. So I would just come.
Yeah.
And there was always just like good music, and like, you know, I would buy records. He would, you know, put me on to different records and tell me about new stuff that came in. So I just enjoyed being in the space
Yeah.
because, you know, there aren't really a lot of spaces like that for young like people who like music in Detroit. Like not catered specifically to that particular group. There are lots of great record shops in the city, but I don't know a lot of them that have like producer showcases or you know, like just even like social gatherings. And so it was hidden, especially in the summertime. Like, you know, you just be there hanging out, people playing records, you meet people. And then yeah, that's how we met.
And so when did you feel like was your coming out party as an artist on the
Coming out party
on the scene? Like, you know, because now people, I think, identify you as a person that creates now. You know what I'm saying? Like, people know who you are. So what do you feel like was that moment where it's like you went from being like somebody that was just kind of like a, you know, present on the scene to somebody that like now is regarded as a creative on the scene?
I think it was this Video 7 showcase in, I want to say it was 2018 at El Club. Brendan.
Asante?
Asante. I had just recorded Contemplate. That was like the first song that I finished on the EP. And I played it for him and got a good response from him. And he was like, we're doing this showcase series, and we want to like kind of, you know, create space for other local artists outside of Video 7 to like perform and connect and stuff. And so he asked me. I was really honored because I don't think that I had ever played in a venue like that. And one thing that's important to me as a performer is like I need the space to create my space. And so I was able to do that for the first time and be really intentional about lighting and like costume, and had a projection for the first time, and it was just really cool to like kind of have this, that it felt like a coming out.
Let's play. Can we play a little bit of Contemplate?
Play
Let's
some
play
of
a
that.
little bit of Contemplate. So how did that come together?
Um, so I met Askans, want to say like fall of 2017. I was introduced to him through my friend Brian Oscar, who is just like an interdisciplinary artist. They were neighbors. I was telling Brian that I wanted to like just give music like a real try. Like I wanted to just put all my effort, energy into it, and really, really actually like make something. Brian had been trying to like get me to sing for a long time. He'd been encouraging me, you know, always putting a microphone in my hand, because he's always making things and recording things and just like being a creative person. And he was like, oh, okay, sure, like, you know. And I was like, yeah, I want to make some house music. I want to like make this and that. And in my head, I was like, I want to make house music, but I knew that there were going to be other elements because I was like feeling really fired up about like, you know, kind of like being experimental about it. And so we're walking, you know, after I like dumped all of this onto him, I'm walking out of his place with him. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, like, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that I'm going to make, you know, an EP. And I'm walking towards the door to leave. I reach for the doorknob. The door swings open, and Askans is like standing there with his bicycle. And then Brian's behind me. He's like, oh, y'all need to make music. Oh, like, you know, and I'm like, okay, like, sure. Yeah. So, you know, I had been like kind of, at the time, I didn't really think that what I was doing was like conceptualizing the project. But for like 2 years, you know, as I mentioned before, I had been like kind of just sitting with like how Afrofuturism made me feel. And like I had been reading this book called The Mysticism of Sound and Music, written by this I want to say he's like a Sufi priest. So it's like a collection of talks that he did that were transcribed. And I was just feeling like, you know, very, very like specific and pointed about like what my intention was with the music. And I was like, this is what I want to do. You know, I want to make music that includes these elements. You know, I've been thinking about this type of like structure for songwriting. And he was like, oh yeah, I've been like wanting to make some stuff like that. You know, and from there, like we set a date to when we were going to meet. And I want to say like maybe the first day was us just kind of establishing a language to understand each other. So we would, you know, say a lot of things that like didn't necessarily make sense, but like that we understood amongst ourselves. And Contemplate, we recorded probably within like a week or 2 weeks. Like he had all of these loops and samples that he had been arranging and collecting for, you know, for a long time. And he would just play me these really short loops and we would build them out together. And then he would pull out his bass and he was just learning how to play. And so he would, you know, kind of plunk out a bass line and I would write, you know, a mantra and kind of mess around with like a melody. And we had an SP404. He had an SP404. Okay. So I would record into that and like just kind of mess around with like effects and rhythms and yeah, like we just, it was just really wild. Like he had so much equipment. He had so much stuff. So we just had a lot to work with. And he already, you know, he had a flow that he was comfortable with. And I was like new to just even creating. So it was easy for me to kind of like navigate what he was doing because I was like developing my own thing. Yeah, it was like maybe a week. And when I told him that I wanted to write in the form of like mantra and call and response, because I was like also inspired by traditional Nigerian like gospel music song structure, and there's this like, you know, the main vocalist is singing something and then the chorus is like kind of doing a call and response,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it can be like super repetitive, or
Mhm.
sometimes, you know, it can just be like an answer to a question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, you know, thinking about like, what is it that I want? How do I want to respond to myself, or how do I want to, you know, like guide myself through the song and through the soundscape?
Mm-hmm.
He was like, yeah, you should like, you know, punctuate it like this, or you should like, you know.
Mm-hmm. So, about how long did it take to like do that EP, like record that EP?
I feel like it took about 3 months
Okay.
to record it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just started performing it.
Mm-hmm.
Some songs took longer than others. I want to say that Open took the longest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why did Open take the longest?
Open, I feel like it took the longest because it was not just a really vulnerable song for me, but it was something that Askans also felt really emotionally connected to, that particular beat.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just there had to be a middle ground for the both of us when we were kind of like thinking about what felt right, and we would go back to it. It started off with just like me like kind of singing in like a way that sounded like a siren, and he looped it, and then he produced around that, and then he would like play bass, and then I was writing different melodies and different like choruses, and we were thinking about like what feeling we wanted to communicate, and like how we could do how we could produce my vocals to kind of reflect that. So like even in the chorus, when when I'm saying open up yourself, and then the selves kind of like ascend harmonically, that was something that like, you know, didn't come immediately, but we definitely had to meditate on that.
Mm-hmm. Let's listen to a little of it. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
How do I let you? I want to breathe deeply and openly again, and I want to love without fear, sing from my belly, dance without care, push out, open up, leave your doubt, open up, push out, open up, leave your doubt, open up yourself, open up yourself, open up yourself, open up yourself. How do I forgive? How do I let live? I want to breathe deeply and openly again, and I want to love without fear, sing from my belly, dance without care, push out, open up, leave your doubt, open up, push out, open up, leave your doubt, open up yourself, open up yourself, open up yourself.
So yeah. That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, wow. So you were saying this stuff is very personal to you. How do you feel when you listen back to this stuff or perform this stuff?
That's definitely changed over time. It felt like it just felt really vulnerable because a lot of the things that I was writing about, I wrote to kind of affirm myself as the performer. And so, open, like for me, is about wanting to be a singer, wanting to be an artist, wanting to kind of like release all of these beliefs I had around why I couldn't do it based on who said what and who believed in what I could do and who, told me that, being an artist wasn't like a real career
Job.
path. Yeah. Or that, I couldn't be an artist. Like,
Right.
and I just felt really deeply inspired by music and the music that I wanted to make, and I had to release it. And so I wasn't even really thinking so much consciously about it, but when I would perform, when I would sing, even, singing in front of a CN sometimes was like, it felt vulnerable because we had just met. And I'm like singing these songs, writing these lyrics, and I'm sure he didn't know what I was even talking about.
Right.
And what kind of, what my inner world looked like and who, I was writing for and to. And so, like, for open, when I was saying, how do I forgive? How do I let live? I want to breathe deeply and openly again. As a singer, you can only sing if you're like, breathing and like, releasing the tension from your body and like feeling comfortable and confident in your body and in yourself. And sometimes that can be really difficult. That can be a challenge. So it was an affirmation for me to kind of release that and let go so that I could move on to the contemplate and to find and kind of just, experience this journey with the audience instead of being like caught up in this mental anxiety about sharing or being perfect or knowing, having all the answers.
What did you feel like when it was done?
It felt so good. It felt so good. It was like a feeling. I remember when we finished To Find,
Right.
I was just like, oh, that's it. It's done. And there were some people who were like, oh, EP is 5 songs.
Right.
You got to do it like this. You got to do it like that.
Tell Freddie Gibbs that.
I know, right?
Tell all these people that.
And, everybody's like saying, what you should and shouldn't do. I know the intentions are, hopefully coming from a good place, but like artistry.
But see, let me tell you something. I think that is the difference, and that's part of the it thing, is that, though it's well-meaning, I feel like a lot of people that are creative still kind of embody a lot of standards just because they think that's what you're supposed to do. And I feel like the artistry at its best a lot of times is people being able to embrace the changes that need to happen to express something authentically that may cause a reworking of the standards or destroying.
We create the standards as people who are creating and consuming. Yeah. So I don't want to, if I was gonna, I would go work a 9 to 5 and do the other things that, everybody feels like you have to do to, be happy. If I was, prioritizing the standard or the current structure as it exists, I don't really see myself as the kind of artist that fits into that kind of structure.
Yeah.
Which also kind of like contributed to the anxiety that I was feeling and writing about in the beginning, because so many people were, trying to put me in this box. And
what was the box? What'd you say?
Pop music.
Okay.
Pop music.
And why were they putting you in the pop box? That's
just their only frame of reference for what a successful or fulfilled artist, can look like, or, how they can create. You have to make this, you have to perform in these places, you have to, be able to do whatever. Like, I'm not really motivated by those things.
That's kind of a weird thing to me too right now, because if you look at pop artists now. The pop artists are the Migos. The pop
Yeah,
artists
right.
is
So
like,
it's not even.
You know what I mean? Like people that like aren't that completely aren't the
Mhm.
traditional idea
Mhm.
of Drake. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
So
I mean, even from just like a music, like business and industry standpoint, based
Mhm.
on the information that I have been able to like kind of accumulate over, the past 2 years, 3 years,
right.
it's changing rapidly. And the industries, like the industry is like kind of like the wild, wild west, basically. Like
Mhm.
technology has advanced so rapidly that the industry is trying to keep up with technology.
Right.
And, the algorithm or like whatever. At this point, nobody really knows what's going on. Nobody
Mhm.
knows what, so why even like, be invested
Right.
in trying to keep up with that when you could just make good stuff
Mhm.
and share it with people and, just maintain that integrity. There are a lot of people I feel like who are trying to chase an algorithm or like a standard and
Mhm.
sacrificing their like creativity. And I feel like the creativity is what makes you who you are and what
Mhm.
makes people interested in wanting to, see what you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah. So look, so I feel like I so want to tell this story. So we
Okay.
had the fortune of being able to work together,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so crazy how it came about.
Yeah.
So for people listening or watching, so this is so crazy. So Cass, as she said, was kind of like part of this scene of people that kind of would converge at Pyramida often, and I would see Cass, and for a while it's like we would talk and it was love, but like we really hadn't had much time to build. And I was finishing up an album with my little brother Bodie James, and I was working on the last song on the record, and it was crazy because I thought I was about done, and I had a friend of mine say, "I hear voices in the beat. Like, where are the voices from?" I'm like, "It's no voices in there." Like, "It's voices in there." I'm like, "It's no voices in there." Like, "It's voices in there." I'm like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "Yes, it is." And so I started going, "Damn, who would I have on this if there were voices in this?" And the first person I thought of was you. Like, Kess would be amazing, but because like I function in a way that's like so non-exploitive and so like, you know, non-capitalizing a lot of times, I was like, it was just a thought. Like I wasn't gonna pursue it just because it's like I usually give time for the development of my relationships with people to get to a place of like, just love, trust, understanding, whatever. So I was like, I'm not gonna ask because I don't want to just come on and be like a person. Hey, I want you to do this, So I wasn't gonna. Literally the next day.
Wild.
You called me and like, can I come over? And I'm like, what the hell?
Oh man.
So the funny thing was, I still wasn't going to say anything to you.
Yeah.
And so we're like sitting there talking. And you're like, so what you been working on? And I'm like, funny you should ask.
That's so funny.
And so I play it, and I'm still like, I'm not going to ask her, though. Like, I'm not. And then we just sitting there quiet, and I'm like, I heard you on this. You remember what you said?
Like, what? Probably something like that.
No, you
What'd
said,
I say?
I heard myself on it.
Oh, no! Yeah, that sounds right.
Right. So I'm like, you want to do it? So we do it. Right? And that was that. Now, at the time, you didn't necessarily realize, because I didn't really play, I might have muted his vocals at that time when I was recording you. perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't necessarily recognize what the song was
Mm-hmm.
originally. So can you tell the people what was the song originally?
Oh my God, please. Oh my gosh. It was this song that my friends and I used to listen to like a lot when I was, I want to say 18.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized it
And what was it?
with the Black Mag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the song? You remember
I don't remember the title.
the Getting Flicked?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man. What a song. An amazing song.
Yeah.
It felt so full circle because I just remember listening to it so much and like just like having these definitive memories of like happiness and like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just like camaraderie with my friends
Mm-hmm.
in my adolescence. And then like, and it was like a moment that kind of also defined my musical taste.
Right, because what you told me was it was one of those songs that made you kind of want to do music,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So imagine, I record you,
yeah.
you come back, and I play to you like a close to finished version of this song, and you're like, why do those lyrics sound so familiar to me? And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm not thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So this song, Getting Flicked, that she's referring to, which actually appeared on a Cool Kids mixtape. I think it was Tackle Box, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. But it was basically the song that introduced Boldy James to the world,
Mm-hmm.
which Boldy, like, that's like my baby. Like, first place he ever recorded a song was at my house, you know. And so that song was originally our song. And he was with his cousin, who was a genius, Chuck English of the Cool Kids in Chicago. And Chuck is like, you know, you got to let us use this. And he's like, but it's, you know, it's my song with my man or whatever. He's like, please. So it ends up becoming Getting Flicked.
Yeah.
So me and all my turtleness have been like slowly working on this album forever. Still had the original version of it, and it grew and evolved, and ended up being 1 million musicians playing on this song. Ending with Kess playing on the song, singing on the song. And so we're sitting there, and she's like, like, oh my God, like this is it, like this is Getting Flicked. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm telling her, like, you are on the original version now.
That's so wild.
Of one of the songs that made you
Time traveling thing.
want to
Man.
do music. And that to me is like, that is the serendipity that is the receipt of following your passion.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
the infinite synchronicity of your purpose saying, yep, you're exactly where you're supposed to be in the universe, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Man. It's so wild. And then I remember telling my friend who introduced me to the song, who introduced me to the Cool Kids,
Right.
that I was on the original version. He was like, what? Just so crazy. After a certain point, it's just like so much synchronicity. You just
Right.
like don't even know how to be surprised anymore.
Right.
You know? Because it feels so like specific to you and your journey. And like, it's always like really rewarding, and it just feels like such a blessing to experience. Like I don't even, at the time when I was listening to Getting Flicked, like I didn't even understand like its connection to like Detroit music and like just the degrees of separation that I would eventually have to the artist who,
Right.
you know, wrote the line. And, you know, a lot of times, like, I don't really know, you know, a lot of things about like people's relationships to each other. I'm just like following my heart and my mind,
Right.
and kind of ending up in spaces with people who, you know, are really passionate about making music. And I feel like attracts like, and then you have the reward of being able to come to that realization after the fact and not have it kind of filter your experience, or like the purity of your experience.
So can you recall any other moments of serendipity that you're like, whoa, in
my
terms of music? Like,
So I mentioned earlier that my introduction to electronic music was Underground Resistance, specifically the Timeline record. I remember being like, had less than 10 and like sitting by the radio late at night and hearing this song with like this like super like interstellar like jazzy kind of feel, and just like my mind being blown, and never finding out who made the song, what the name of the song was, until college. And my roommate and I were talking about just Detroit electronic music and like our relationship to it one evening, and we like were singing the melody to each other. We're like, we gotta find out, you know, like who made the record. I think it took like 5 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours for us to like actually figure it out. And when we found it out, I was like, okay, Underground Resistance, like let me, you know, like let me learn. And so I learned, you know, pretty much like everything that I could find on the internet about Underground Resistance. And one thing that stood out to me was that, you know, they don't like to be photographed.
right.
So I never knew what they looked like. I met your cousin at a Piper Carter event,
Right.
and we exchanged information. And then I told you about it, and you're like, yeah, you know, like I want to connect you. I'm in the studio with Ben one day. He texts me, he says, hey, Cass, you know, I completely forgot that I'm doing this event at Submerge. It's, you know, going to be ending in an hour. Do you think you have any time to like come by? And I'm down the street. So I'm like, oh, wow, okay, like let me, you know, see what's happening. Go over there. And Mike Banks comes downstairs.
Yeah.
And like I'm just like, wow, like this is so wild.
Yeah.
Mike Banks is here. Like I'm meeting the person who like, you know, influenced me to even make electronic music in the first place.
Right.
And so we're just like walking around the museum, and he's telling me about his grandkids, and we're talking about Africa, and I think he just took a liking to me because I was just listening and like, you know, just trying to learn. And then he invited Ben and I into the studio upstairs, and I asked him if I could play a track that I haven't released yet for him. And he really liked the track. And then he was just telling me that he hadn't been, you know, really excited about like new music coming out of Detroit in a long time, but he felt like really excited about what I was making. And it was just such a full circle moment to hear this man who influenced me, who doesn't even know, because I don't think I ever told him, you know, that like he's impressed with what I've been able to create, and that he just wants to support me in what it is that I'm doing, and that I can, you know, come and like utilize the space. I just did a performance there that you DJ'd at.
Yeah. So your release
Yeah.
was at this place.
Yeah, it was. And it was just such a beautiful, like, you know, just even putting myself in that position as a child by the radio listening to Timeline. I could have never imagined that I would, for one, be singing, two, be singing, you know, over electronic music, or, you know, even making electronic music, and then three, singing electronic music in the Techno Museum, like in Underground Resistance's like headquarters. It was such a full circle moment for me, and it just felt like so unique to like my journey and my relationship to music, and it just felt like a gift.
Let me tell you, man, people kept calling me about damn tickets for that show. I'm like, I don't have no tickets.
Like, I wish that we had more
man,
room.
It was, it was a hot commodity, that
Wow.
ticket, man. Like, I'm like, whoa, this is serious. Like,
Wow.
people that don't call me for nothing were calling me about trying to get into that show.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
You know, so it's beautiful to see, like, there are people that I think really, really connect to what you're doing, you know. And you don't see a lot of artists here before the hype train happens that there are people, listeners, that are like, I have to be there to see this person, you know. Like, that's a very special thing, you know. And you definitely have people that are in your corner like that, you know. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that's being built, you know. So what do you feel like is next? Do you feel like are you recording new things? Are things coming together for a new project? Are you just kind of filling things out? Where are you at right now?
I'm kind of taking things in right now, and in that, like, taking in process, building something that doesn't stem from, like, this childhood narrative, because I feel like a lot of what I was making kind of came from this, like, desire to express repressed, like, childhood things, you know, wanting to, like, just be an individual and, like, identify, you know, self-identify. And I did that. I self-identified in a way that I just really fuck with. And now that I'm just like, okay, like, yeah, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, I want to continue to, like, make music in a way that feels authentic. And I'm taking my time to, like, really figure that out, because I want to be able to share in a way that I feel proud of. I want to be able to share in a way that feels like timeless, or in a way that just feels like you can continue to take from it.
So do you feel, because I feel like a lot of artists feel this, like they release something and then they feel a lot of pressure to follow up. Do you feel any pressure to follow up, or to, like, you know, because too, like, sometimes it's like people want you to keep making the same thing that you made.
Yeah, that's not
Also,
happening.
you know.
I'll just tell you now, that's not gonna happen. What I really love the most about the artists that I listen to or follow the most is that they're always, like, discovering. They're always on a path of self-discovery. They're always exploring, like, music and listening to different things and creating different things and trying different things, and that's what makes it exciting.
Right.
I don't want to listen to an artist that's going to make the same song 50, 60 times.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times too, you set the rapport that you're going to have with your audience, because I think, for example, I think about certain artists that might have made things in a particular way for a while, and then the audience got accustomed to it, and then they decide to, like, go left, and the audience is like, oh, what are you doing? You know, and even, like, it's like, actually, and people are always like, man, but Common's Electric Circus album is one of my favorite Common albums. I think it's an incredible album.
Yeah.
But it was like he had maybe 3 or 4 records before that where people got accustomed to like something that's identified as being like more traditional hip hop. And then he does something, he goes left, and everybody's like, no, you know, and it was like, it was dope, but it was like the audience that got comfortable with seeing him and hearing him a certain way, you know. And then you have like artists like Outkast that I think they were smart because that second album they completely disrupted like what happened the first. Like everybody that was coming back for Southern Playalistic got a rude awakening, right? But then it was like, wait a minute, this is dope too. And then it became like you began to expect the unexpected from them,
Yeah.
to where they had a pass to go all these different places
Yeah.
creatively. So you saw Outkast as a group that was going to take you somewhere you
Mhm.
didn't expect
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah,
You know.
you don't get comfortable.
Right.
You looking forward to, like, I mean, we're all looking forward to like anything that like Andre 3000 or Big Boy like
Mhm.
releases, because they just have like developed that rapport with us for
Yeah.
putting out something that's of quality,
Mhm.
and also something that is like an evolution of like an artistic vision.
Right. So you have a version of one of their songs, actually.
I do. I do. Yeah.
And what song is that?
Spody Odie Doubleicious.
And how did that come about? But it's
Yeah.
not. So this is something that you just do live now, right?
Yeah.
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 So,
I love that
but how did this
song.
version come about?
So I knew that after about maybe a year and a half of performing, I felt like there was a disconnect, and this could just be like coming from my perspective as the person that's on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I wanted to be more intentional about communicating the lineage I was pulling from, or just like what world I was living in, and like who my musical like ancestors are.
Right.
And so I started to think more about set design and like what that looks like and what that sounds like, and how that can like carry the audience through a soundscape intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
I know that just the bluesy, soulfulness of Outkast like has informed like just my creative spirit and vision.
Mm-hmm.
And Spody Odie Doubleicious is like one of my favorite songs of all time.
Mm-hmm. Cause that was Aquemini, right?
Mhm.
So that was 98, I think.
Mhm.
How old were you in 98?
Don't worry about how old I was. Shout out to my brother on the way to school. I was probably like in first grade. And the thing is, I couldn't pronounce the title of that song. So I was just like, just play the song with the
I
horns.
still can't pronounce the title of that song. Yeah.
But it was just such a it's like, you have these moments if you listen to music,
Mm-hmm.
if you're passionate about listening to music, that are like definitive of your taste.
Mm-hmm.
I read some article somewhere that said like there are moments in people's lives where like they listen to a song that opens up a world for them,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of, a lot of people don't really move beyond that moment.
Right.
So I'm always looking to move beyond that moment. I've had a few of those moments
Mm-hmm.
since then, since I was 6,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
But that moment, I just remember being in the backseat in my brother's like Honda, whatever he had. And, he was really super like, he was just creative. He was an artist, but he also like installed stuff in cars. So he had speakers and stuff in his car. And so it was just really loud. Like it was just super loud.
Mm-hmm.
And you just hear like this like drum roll introduction, and then you just hear the bass line, and you hear some like kind of wah on the guitar, and then you just hear Andre's voice coming through, and it's got like some type of like reverb delay kind of thing on it. And then you hear the horns, and you don't expect the horns to come in. And so I'm like a child like going on this musical journey, and then there's a story, like there's 2 stories.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so I was just like really like just like taken aback as a child, and I always like listen to that song. And as a performer, it just makes me comfortable. Like it's just like, this is my shit, like I want to rap this song, and I know, we're on the same page if you can rap this song with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I know. And even if you can't, like I just feel like very comfortable.
Yeah. And the craziest thing about you performing that song at Submerge for your release was that like I'm 43. So I was 22 when that came out.
Yeah.
And I'm in a room full of 20-somethings that were either in diapers, some of them not born yet,
Yeah.
that know all the words of this, and I'm like, whoa, like,
Man.
wait a minute.
That's how you know it's good music, okay? Good
Yeah.
music. Yeah, that song, like, I wish that I would have earlier in my practice as a performer thought to, like, just incorporate songs that just made me feel comfortable. Because I think I, had this belief that I had to, like, sing all of my own songs. And I didn't really, like, create an intention. And as time moved on, I, like, kind of got more specific about what my intention was as a performer. And it's just to kind of create this space to connect authentically with an audience musically. And like, how can I do that if y'all don't know what my favorite songs are?
Right. You see, like, the genetic code, what's in the DNA of an artist. Like, I was like going back and forth with Kari about because they just did the Unsung on Christopher Williams, and some like just like looking at different stuff on YouTube or whatever, Christopher Williams, and it's like I see in his set a lot. He does a lot of Teddy Pendergrass songs, and it's like he's the perfect person to like to like do a few Teddy Pendergrass songs. I was like, it's obvious, it's blaring. Like, wow, like that was a part of his genetic code creatively, know. Because one thing about it is like it's such a conversation. You know what I mean? Like, even if you have people playing together, like playing different instruments, there's still like a conversation that's happening between all of those people playing. Music is us listening to music is basically us just listening to the documentation of a social conversation, in a lot of ways. So, to like hear the breath of thoughts that came before you within the life of what you express is like, like it makes complete sense, Yeah. It's been so good talking to you.
It's been great.
Has it been cool? Has it been your first? Is this your first podcast?
It is my first podcast.
Is it?
Yeah, it is actually.
I was like, because Kari's like been on me about doing this, so I'm like, okay, it's like let me start with the people that I love dearly. So Bodie, I just did Bodie, and now you, which you two are tied in this whole project.
Shout out to Bodie for getting flicked, man. What a record! It's awesome.
And two, it is like there's actually some other people that you kind of mentioned that I think may be here soon too. So it would be dope. But yeah, like I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
I really, the funny thing about it is I don't think you fully understand okay, I don't think you fully understand the brilliance that you possess, and I think you're growing into like understanding that. But I truly believe that you possess something creatively that is as significant can get, And so I look forward to the development of that and the blossoming of that, and hope to continue nurturing that however I can continue nurturing that.
Thank you, Sterling. That means a lot.
Yeah, you mean a lot. Anything else you want to say to the people?
Stream soften. And just thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being interested in my thoughts and my feelings and my taste. That means a lot to me. I always try to be super intentional about anything that I do. And I just hope, it's my hope and my wish as I grow as an artist to be able to continue to create on a larger scale in a way that makes room for other people to do the same thing.
Well said. All right, so I am about to sign off. This is Detroit is Different. I am your host, one of your hosts, Sterling Toles, and saying goodbye with my baby Kesswa. I love you.
Love you too.
And peace, y'all.
Detroit is different is where you get information, artistry, history, music, and even comedy. Detroit is different, a home for the culture of Detroit. Visit online at DetroitisDifferent.com today.